saved by a tiger. The last helicopter is gone. Sergeant First Class Bennie Adkins stands at the extraction point watching it disappear into the sky. He's carrying a wounded soldier, bleeding from 18 separate wounds. He's fought for 38 hours straight, killed somewhere between 135 and 175 North Vietnamese soldiers, held off an entire battalion with 16 other Americans, and now he's been left behind. Around him, a small group of survivors, Americans, South Vietnamese fighters, all wounded, all exhausted, all realizing the same thing. They're alone in the jungle, miles from friendly forces, surrounded by the enemy battalion that just overran their camp. The North Vietnamese are coming, hunting them, following their blood trail through the jungle. Then Adkins hears something that makes his blood run cold. Not enemy soldiers, something worse, a tiger stalking them. An Indochinese tiger, 300 pounds of muscle and teeth, following the blood, the scent of wounded men, leaving a trail through Vietnam's heart of darkness. The A Shau Valley, where whole units disappeared, where everyone knew about the tigers but no one wanted to go find out. Now a tiger is hunting Adkins and his survivors, and somehow, impossibly, that tiger is about to save their lives. This is the story of how a drafted Oklahoma farm boy became a Green Beret, how he fought for 38 hours with 18 wounds, how he was left behind in the jungle, and how a man-eating tiger scared the North Vietnamese more than American soldiers ever could. Bennie Jean Adkins was born on February 1st, 1934, in Waurika, Oklahoma, a small farming town, the kind of place where work was scarce and futures were limited. There wasn't much work back in Waurika, Adkins later said. Maybe day work on the farm or fry cooking or something like that is what it amounted to. On December 5th, 1956, at 22 years old, Bennie Adkins was drafted into the United States Army. He saw it as a way out, a chance, an opportunity to be something more than a fry cook in a town with no future. The Army made a clerk-typist out of him, sent him to Gießen, Germany, a garrison unit, administrative work, safe, boring. Within 20 months, he was a sergeant, but he was restless. He didn't join the army to type. He joined to be the best he could possibly be. Adkins requested transfer to infantry. The army sent him to Fort Benning, Georgia for training, then to the 2nd Infantry Division. He attended Airborne School, learned to jump from perfectly good aircraft, earned his wings. In 1961, Adkins volunteered for something else. Special Forces, the Green Berets, the elite, the soldiers who operated behind enemy lines, who trained indigenous forces, who did the missions no one else could do. He was accepted, graduated the Special Forces qualification course, spent the next 13 years serving with the 7th, 3rd, 6th, and 5th Special Forces Groups. By February 1963, Sergeant First Class Bennie Adkins deployed to South Vietnam. First tour, learning the jungle, learning the enemy, learning what it took to survive in a war with no front lines. He came home in August 1963, went back in September 1965, second tour, this time to Camp A Shau, a remote Special Forces camp in the A Shau Valley, Vietnam's heart of darkness. The valley ran west from the city of Hue to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, dense jungle, mountains, fog, tigers, and thousands of North Vietnamese soldiers using it as a staging area for operations into South Vietnam. Camp A Shau sat at the southern end of the valley. 17 Americans, 381 South Vietnamese civilian irregular defense group fighters, surrounded by enemy forces that outnumbered them by orders of magnitude. Everyone knew an attack was coming. Prisoners captured during patrols said so. 2 North Vietnamese soldiers walked in and surrendered, told the Americans they'd be attacked in a couple days, as soon as weather prevented air support. The CIDG was initially designed to train local villagers to defend their own villages, but at Camp A Shau, There was no village, just a remote outpost deep in enemy territory. And when the attack came, the Americans would learn something terrifying about their South Vietnamese allies. Not all of them planned to fight on the American side. At 0350 hours on March 9, 1966, thick fog enveloped Camp A Shau. Low-hanging clouds, perfect weather for an attack. No air support, no observation, no help. Then the mortars started falling, 82mm, 120mm, pounding the camp's defenses, destroying antennas, killing men, creating chaos. They hit us, Adkins said. They laid down some mortar on us initially, then mass assaults. The North Vietnamese 325th Division, 2 companies probing the south wall, using Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps in the concertina wire, charging through, killing Americans. Adkins rushed through intense enemy fire, manned an 81mm mortar position, started adjusting fire, dropping rounds on enemy positions, defending the camp. The mortar pit took several direct hits. Enemy mortars. Adkins was wounded, blown out of the pit, got back in, kept firing. He learned that several soldiers were wounded near the center of camp. He temporarily turned the mortar over to another soldier, ran through exploding mortar rounds, dragged several comrades to safety. Then it got down to individual weapons and hand grenade fighting. As the hostile fire subsided temporarily, Adkins repeatedly exposed himself to sporadic sniper fire, carrying wounded comrades to the camp dispensary, making sure they received treatment, making sure they stayed alive. Then something happened that changed everything. Members of the CIDG, the South Vietnamese fighters they'd trained, they switched sides, started fighting with the North Vietnamese. We found that once the battle started, we had one company of these irregulars just change sides and fought with the North Vietnamese. Suddenly, the Americans weren't just fighting an external enemy. They were fighting former allies who knew the camp layout, who knew the defensive positions, who knew where the Americans were. The battle raged all day, March 9th into March 10th, continuous fighting, mortars, machine guns, small arms, hand grenades, close combat. During the early morning hours of March 10th, enemy forces launched their main attack. Within 2 hours, Adkins was the only man firing a mortar weapon. Everyone else was dead or wounded or fighting elsewhere. He fired until he ran out of mortar rounds, then switched to recoilless rifle, placing effective fire on enemy positions, keeping them back, keeping them from overrunning the camp. Running low on ammunition, Adkins moved outside the camp walls, retrieved supplies from a resupply drop that landed outside the perimeter, exposed himself to enemy fire, brought back ammunition that kept the defense going. By noon on March 10th, the situation was desperate. 5 Americans dead, many wounded, the camp being overrun, Air Force pilots attempting evacuations. Adkins purposely drew enemy fire to his position, standing, shooting, making himself a target, so the pilots could see where to land, so they could evacuate the other soldiers. After 38 hours of continuous combat, the order came. Evacuate the camp, everyone out, now. Adkins and a small group of soldiers destroyed all signal equipment and classified documents, dug their way out of the rear of a bunker, fought their way toward the extraction point. Adkins was carrying a wounded soldier through enemy fire, through the jungle, toward the landing zone where helicopters would pull them out. He reached the extraction point, looked up. The last helicopter was already departing. They'd been left behind. 17 Americans at the start of the battle, 5 dead, 12 survivors, but only a handful made it to the extraction point, and the helicopters were gone. Adkins looked at his small group, Americans, South Vietnamese who'd stayed loyal, all wounded, all bleeding, all realizing they were alone in the A Shau Valley, surrounded by an enemy battalion, miles from friendly forces. The North Vietnamese were hunting them, following their trail, trying to finish what the battle started. For 48 hours, Adkins led the group through the jungle, evading the enemy, moving when they could, hiding when they couldn't, waiting for rescue that might never come. Adkins had 18 separate wounds covering his body, shrapnel, bullets, mortar fragments, burns, each one throbbing, each one bleeding, each one sapping his strength. When asked later how he could continue to help others evade the enemy with so many wounds, Adkins gave a simple answer. You just don't quit. You don't know what the word quit means? The group moved slowly, wounded men helping more wounded men, leaving a blood trail through the jungle, a trail the North Vietnamese were following, a trail something else was following too. The tiger appeared on the second day, an Indochinese tiger, native to the A Shau Valley, 300 pounds, a man-eater. It was not uncommon in the A Shau, Adkins later said. The tiger was stalking them, following the blood, the scent of wounded men, easy prey. The tiger was intrigued. He was a tiger after all. The North Vietnamese hunters tracking the Americans saw the tiger too, and suddenly their priorities changed. They were more scared of that tiger than they were of us, Adkins said. The North Vietnamese backed off, created distance, gave the Americans room. The tiger had done what American firepower couldn't, made the enemy afraid. On March 12th, 1966, after 48 hours of escape and evasion, helicopters finally arrived. The group was extracted, pulled out of the jungle, away from the North Vietnamese, away from the tiger, home. During the 38-hour battle and 48 hours of escape, Adkins killed between 135 and 175 of the enemy, while sustaining 18 wounds, while leading his men, while refusing to quit. The Army awarded Adkins the Distinguished Service Cross in 1967, the nation's second highest award for valor, a significant recognition, but not the highest. Adkins went on to serve a third tour in Vietnam, January through December 1971, attended the Sergeant Major Academy, became Sergeant Major at the Jungle Warfare School in Panama, retired in 1978 after 22 years of service. He earned his bachelor's degree from Troy State University in 1979, then his master's degree in education in 1982, then a second master's degree in management in 1988. He established Adkins Accounting Service, Inc. in Auburn, Alabama, served as CEO for 22 years, taught night classes at Southern Union Junior College for 10 years, at Auburn University for 6 years. He married Mary. Together they raised 5 children, built a quiet life in Alabama, far from the A Shau Valley, far from the tigers and the mortars and the blood trails through the jungle. Then in 2002, the Army began reviewing all 6,500 recipients of the Distinguished Service Cross, looking for actions that had been worthy of the Medal of Honor but received a lesser award due to bureaucratic limitations or timing issues or lost documentation. Adkins's actions at Camp A Shau were among them. In 2013, as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, the Senate Armed Services Committee passed a provision removing the time limit for Medal of Honor nominations. 48 years after the battle, Adkins could finally receive proper recognition. On September 15, 2014, President Barack Obama presented the Medal of Honor to retired Command Sergeant Major Bennie Adkins at the White House. "I have to be honest," Obama said. "Bennie performed so many acts of bravery, we actually don't have time to list them all. Bennie ran into enemy fire again and again. Obama mentioned the tiger, said Adkins told him that the enemy was more scared of that tiger than they were of us." After the ceremony, Adkins spoke to reporters about the medal, about what it meant, about who it belonged to. "I'm just a keeper of the medal for those other 16 people who were in the battle," he said, "especially the 5 who didn't make it." That's how Adkins saw it. The medal belonged to the 17 Americans at Camp A Shau, 5 who died, 12 who survived, all who fought for 38 hours against impossible odds. On March 17, 2020, Bennie Adkins was hospitalized with COVID-19. The virus hit him hard. He was admitted to intensive care, put on a ventilator after experiencing respiratory failure. On April 17, 2020, Command Sergeant Major Bennie Jean Adkins died from complications of the virus. He was 86 years old. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on December 16, 2020. Among heroes, among the brothers who understood what he'd done, what he'd sacrificed, what he'd carried for 54 years. The Bennie G. Adkins Foundation continues his work, raising funds for scholarships for enlisted Special Forces troops transitioning to civilian life, helping them build futures after service, giving them the opportunities Adkins found when he was drafted out of Waurika all those years ago. The story of Bennie Adkins is about refusing to quit, about fighting for 38 hours with 18 wounds, about leading survivors through 48 hours of escape, about being saved by a tiger when salvation seemed impossible. But more than that, it's about transformation, about what happens when a farm boy from Oklahoma with limited prospects gets drafted and decides to be the best he possibly can be. Adkins didn't have to volunteer for Special Forces, didn't have to deploy to Vietnam 3 times, didn't have to stand in a mortar pit taking direct hits while wounded, didn't have to run through exploding rounds to drag comrades to safety, didn't have to be the last man firing a mortar when everyone else was down, didn't have to draw enemy fire to himself so pilots could evacuate others, didn't have to carry a wounded soldier to an extraction point, and then lead survivors through the jungle for 48 hours after being left behind. He did all of it because that's what being the best meant. That's what the Green Beret demanded. That's what his brothers needed. 17 Americans, 5 killed, 12 survivors, all because Bennie Adkins refused to quit, refused to leave anyone behind, refused to accept that Camp A Shau would fall without a fight. 135 to 175 enemy soldiers killed, 18 wounds sustained, 38 hours of combat, 48 hours of escape, 1 tiger, 1 Medal of Honor presented 48 years late, 1 farm boy from Oklahoma who became a legend. The enemy was more scared of that tiger than they were of us. That's the line everyone remembers. The tiger in the A Shau Valley, the man-eater that stalked the survivors and inadvertently saved them by scaring off the North Vietnamese hunters. But the real story isn't about the tiger. It's about the man the tiger was stalking. The man with 18 wounds who led his group through the jungle for 2 days, who refused to quit, who brought them home. That's Bennie Jean Adkins, Command Sergeant Major, Green Beret, Medal of Honor recipient, the man who was saved by a tiger but earned his salvation through courage, determination, an absolute refusal to abandon his brothers. You just don't quit. You don't know what the word quit means. That's the standard. That's the legacy. That's Bennie Adkins.